Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Julie with Jovi Star Astrology. I hope you all are doing well, hanging in there. Got through the end of the summer and we are into the fall almost. We have the equinox coming up at the end of the month, but we are getting there. I'm going to talk to you today about all the planets that are in retrograde and what we might be able to expect, as well as cover um, some things that occurred over the summer as the planets started to retrograde just before summer. And planets retrograde every year. Some of the bigger planets retrograde every year around the same time frame. So it's not new, but when I look at the astrology, it coincides with a lot of interesting transits that have occurred over the summer, and specifically the Venus retrograde. And Venus doesn't retrograde every year. Venus retrogrades every other year, and so it's a lot of the reason why you hear a lot about this Venus retrograde, or probably have heard a lot about this Venus retrograde, because it just doesn't happen very often. And it did make some significant aspects to some larger planets that have been working in Taurus for a while. And there were some significant effects felt by all of us. And we saw them out there in the world and we felt them personally. So all of the planets that have been retrograde this year, we added in Venus as a retrograde. Now, Venus just came out of her retrograde let's see, yesterday on the 5th. Venus just came out of retrograde yesterday, but she's still in her shadow phase, which means that she hasn't reached the degree that she stationed to go retrograde. And so technically there's still a retrograde flavor in the air when it comes to Venus and Leo for right now. So I want to go back and give you those dates, the dates of all the retrogrades and what we can expect. Talk a little bit more about this Venus retrograde that we're just coming out of. Of course, we've got Mercury in retrograde too, which goes retrograde 3 times a year. And that's a common retrograde, but having Venus in there added a little bit of flavor to the regular, the normal and usual retrograde period. And I will point out some specific dates and times and interesting things that I noticed in looking through the astrology. And also, I thought it would be a really good time to sort of recap a little bit of the full moon in Pisces that we had last week on the 30th that I missed because I had some things going on in my personal life. It was absolutely perfectly matched to the current astrology, and it sort of turned things upside down. But and hopefully none of you experienced anything like that. But I'll just recap a little bit about that Pisces full moon as well. Today we're having a Mercury Cazimi in the sign of Virgo with Mercury retrograde, which means that Mercury meets the sun. And I think I explained how those Cazimis work when we had the Venus Cazimi last month. But basically, when a planet meets with the sun, it's sort of a rebirth process, and it's an opportunity for the sun to shed some light on the themes of the planet that's passing through. And we have Mercury retrograde. So because it's in retrograde, it kind of tells me that we are, the information that's coming through, whether those be through, epiphanies or communications or anything that we might experience, has something to do with work that we need to do or feel like we want to do that is associated with the past. So it's a good time for me I figured, to go over and just touch on the full moon in Pisces. Yeah. full moon in Pisces last Wednesday, August 30th. And the full moon, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, which we know is transiting in the sign of Taurus. So it very much puts a material, practical flavor, or at least folds that in to the full moon in Pisces. And this full moon was conjunct the planet Saturn, which brings in even more sort of realistic, practical themes. And we could have experienced some of those in the sign of Pisces, which is very sensitive and watery, having Saturn transiting through there and conjunct the full moon, the ruler being in the sign of Taurus. This could have been a hardcore material reality check in some way. We could have experienced a block or a delay. This full moon could have been very sobering in some way for you. And whatever that might have been could have created some kind of a block or a delay or an issue that had to be dealt with. Now, because Pisces is emotional and sensitive, it certainly could have come through for some of you, more heavily on the watery, sensitive, emotional, intuitive side. And Saturn coming in could have given you some clarity around that because that's what Saturn does. It brings structure and clarity and form. So I've had experiences with lunar events in Pisces, and many times it represents dreams and strong intuition, very interesting things happening, of course, very sensitive and emotional. This time around for me, and I think it was because of the Saturn combination and the fact that the ruler was in a practical earth sign like Taurus, it sort of came through a little differently. Now, Pisces, the opposition to Virgo, full moon, sun, moon opposite, very much related to our day-to-day routines and our work, maintenance that we may have been needing to do on things, our health, right? So again, that's that axis is balancing the practical world with the a sensitive and sort of mysterious and intuitive world. So for me, I had my air conditioner went out last week, and that was something, Pisces and Saturn, Neptune and Saturn represent air conditioning, oddly enough, right? And it went out. And so for about 3 days, it was miserable. It was really hot last week, so I had to deal with that. And then there were some other issues that came up for me that actually were emotional and sensitive, and kind of brought me to a place where there needed to be a boundary put up, and that came out very clear and very strong. And Saturn represents boundaries. So something like that could have come up for you too, where it was necessary for you to set some kind of emotional boundary that had to do with, what you might be sacrificing in terms of balancing your work and your emotional life, things like that. So it could have been a very sobering full moon. This is actually because Pisces represents also too, emotional issues in terms of, mental and psychological disturbances, as well as illness and sickness, could have been something that you had to deal with where that's concerned. And because it's sobering, I mean, a full moon like that is something that could actually bring about a situation that affected somebody materially and sobered them up, literally sobered them up from using, drugs or alcohol, or came to, an apex where, it was necessary for them to take care of their mental health, things like that. Saturn also represents endings, and Pisces, in the sign of Pisces, 12th house, which is about endings, and a lot of times about, can it be about death? Those kinds of things could have happened, although I hope that wasn't your experience. But I was paying attention, so I was sitting around sweating. at what was going on in the environment, in the news. And, we lost Bob Barker. I don't know, maybe I'm dating myself. Bob Barker, who was the host of The Price is Right for, I don't even know, as long as I can remember, I think 40 plus years. And also an animal rights activist. We lost him last week, a few days before the full moon, and I took a look at his chart, which I won't throw up today because I want to go over a lot of other things. But I took a look at his chart, and the points that lined up with the nodes, the transiting nodes, and his nodes, and the full moon absolutely showed that it was time for him to leave this world, and that his work was done in terms of his evolutionary work this time around. And you could see that in the chart. I also looked at a few other charts, just to see, because I do that. I did the video where I looked at the blindside chart, but I looked up other folks that we might all know that could have been affected by something like this. And Keanu Reeves popped up as a Virgo rising with the Pisces seventh house, right? That's the axis. And when something hits the actual axis, usually that is when something is actually brought out into the light. I mean, a full moon illuminates something so that we can see it anyway. But I thought, well, maybe something's going on with Keanu Reeves, and we'll hear about that. I didn't hear anything. If any of you guys did, let me know. Chances are, based on his chart and his placements, whatever goes on in his life, that he's very particular. Like, what he puts out in the public is purposeful, right? And everything else stays very private. And you could see that in his chart. So I don't know if something came up for Keanu Reeves. It's likely that it did. But anyway, those were some of the themes of the full moon of Pisces that I noticed and that I experienced myself, and just an explanation of things that you might have experienced or looked for. Also, too, because Pisces represents water, big bodies of water, and Taurus is the land, and Jupiter makes things bigger. We had the hurricane in Florida happened. It hit landfall that morning. And they said the full moons will actually affect the earth, right? I mean, we know that tides and things like that. And the tides apparently were just were very large. That the waves coming in and the tides were very, very high. We know there was a lot of destruction there on the west coast of Florida. I think mostly the Clearwater area in the Gulf. And that absolutely matched the astrology as well. So if any of you are listening from that area of the country, I hope that you are doing okay and getting through. So everybody sends some good thoughts to the folks in Florida. All right. So moving on, a little recap there of the Pisces Pisces full moon. Mercury Cassimi today, retrograde. What are you going back and taking care of? What all of a sudden came to you that you were like, I need to do that, or I know the answer to that. I'm going to go back and rework it. Or did you get a message that reminded you of something, or forced you to go back and take care of something, whether that was with your work or maybe a health issue? Those are Virgo themes, right? But likely something coming back up, reoccurring, just something that's being revisited. Let me know if anything came up, or if you felt a sudden urge to do something that you have left on the back burner for a while, and it turned out really, really well, because that can happen too. That Kazemi moment can be very, very special, where, especially in the sign of Virgo, you can actually get down and see the details and get something done, and it might just file itself away just perfectly for you. And that window of time is today with that conjunction, the Mercury Kazemi conjunction retrograde in the sign of Virgo. Okay, let's get to the retrograde planets and the retrograde season. And I have a list written here, so if you see me looking down, that's why, because there's no way we can remember all of these. At least I can't. So we have had about 7 planets retrograde, um, at one point during the summer. And we've had planets that have gone retrograde recently, and I'm going to go through the list and talk just briefly about it, and where you might be able to look in your birth chart or the themes that you might be noticing. But before I do that, I just want to explain that retrograde planets, especially the outer planets, for sure, which would be Uranus and Saturn and Neptune, and even to some extent Jupiter, are said to, when those planets go retrograde, are said to be felt internally, right? It's more of helping us process our internal change system, sort of soak in and marinate on what's going on internally based on our outer experiences. So you could be feeling those things internally. Although I have to say that, like I said, when Uranus went retrograde last Monday, that was the first spark of the malfunction of my air conditioner, which Uranus rules technology, right? In the sign of Taurus, it's going to be things that are related to your comfort, the things that you need in 116-degree weather. You need air conditioning. So literally, it wasn't even an hour after Uranus went retrograde that I had the first glitch on my air conditioner. So these types of things can show themselves in many, many different ways. But overall, in astrology, retrograde planets are said to be planets that, in the experiences of those planets, are to be turned inward and processed from within, right? At least on an individual basis. So we'll start with the planet Pluto, right? Pluto, which we know has been transiting in the sign of Capricorn since 2011, and did dip into the sign of Aquarius back in March this year, 2023, and went retrograde out of the 0 degrees of Aquarius on May the 2nd. The very next day, retrograded back to 29 degrees of Capricorn, where it will move back a few degrees before the retrograde ends. Let me just double check my numbers. Let's see. Oops, the retrograde in Capricorn will end in October. And I have to double check that date because I don't know why I didn't write that down. But anyway, as Pluto is retrograding back into the sign of Capricorn, the late degrees of Capricorn, we are getting a taste of what Pluto is finalizing in terms of its change and transformation, death, rebirth. Those are all Pluto characteristics of what those things are, and what still needs to be broken down and rebuilt before Pluto leaves the sign of Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn and is all about our structures and our work, right? Our commitments and responsibilities. And so we're experiencing these last degrees of Pluto going through the sign of Capricorn. When I think about Pluto, Pluto retrograde, right? And I said it could be more internal, and it could be sort of, you processing internally, either within your body, within your mind. Pluto is connected to the evolutionary process. So it's, Pluto is kind of like pushing and pulling everything that it needs in and out of our lives and our environment to change it and break it down and move it forward and turn it around so that it presents itself in a different form. But I kind of think that Pluto, because Pluto is working in the underworld, and we don't always see it because it can be hidden and it can be very secret things, that it's kind of like what happens when it goes retrograde, right? I think it's kind of always underground a little bit anyway, but maybe it comes to our awareness a little bit more when it's retrograde. But Pluto is such an elusive planet, at least in the moment to moment, it can be elusive as it's breaking down all of the bricks one by one and the nuts and the bolts and, the foundation of everything. And then it hits something and then there's a crumbling effect. Then we feel it, right? It's like, and it could be an atomic, event that we feel, and then we have to rebuild, right? So Pluto is retrograde as of May 2nd, back into the sign of Capricorn. We have Saturn in the sign of Pisces that went retrograde on June the 19th at 7 degrees, which incidentally, 7 degrees of Pisces is exactly where Saturn was, conjunct the full moon that we had last week. That was at 3 degrees Pisces. So that's a 4-degree separation. Saturn was at the 7th degree, which is where Saturn went retrograde on June 19th, the exact degree. So that means something, right? We know that Saturn is transiting back through the first 7 degrees of Pisces between June 19th and November 4th, when it will station and begin to move forward again back through those degrees. So Saturn hitting that 7th degree during this full moon is an important thing to think about. And when we think about Saturn having gone into Pisces back in March, it's a review and sort of a rolling over of that time period. And that full moon represented something from that time period, especially since the new moon in Pisces occurred back during that time, just before, just as Saturn was going or into Pisces. So, I'm sorry, just before Saturn went into Pisces. So it's a theme, right? This 7 degrees of Pisces is a theme. And that 7 degrees, and I know I talked about this during a video at one point, that 7 degrees represents some kind of a wake-up call, right? And when we're talking about Saturn, it's about work and responsibilities and commitments, and our structures in the sign of Pisces, our emotional state, our social responsibilities, healthcare, spirituality, things like that. Okay, we have Venus that I talked about, and I'm going to go back after I go through this list. I'll go back and I'll pull up a chart and show you some interesting things about the Venus retrograde. But we had Venus go retrograde in the sign of Leo on July 24th, and at 28 degrees of Leo. Coming out of its retrograde, still in its shadow, on September 5th at 12 degrees. So 28 to 12 degrees Leo. That's where the retrograde affected your chart. So take a look at where Leo is in your chart and think about the themes that Leo represents. Leo rules the 5th house, ruled by the sun in astrology, and it is all about us. Leo is about it. There's only one sun, right? So this is about our feelings, our expressions, the things that we love, right? Our actions, our own creativity. And Venus going retrograde in the sign of Leo brought those things to the surface. The 5th house also rules children. And I think that there were a lot of themes around children. So, and Venus represents finances and relationships and the things that we value and the things that we love. So, and all those things come together, right? So those are the themes that Venus retrograde in the sign of Leo were bringing up for us over the summer. And a lot of this probably was prompted from our own internal sense of happiness and expression, right? Were we able to be an individual within a relationship? Were we able to express ourselves authentically? Were we able to give ourselves the things that we needed monetarily, right? Did we feel a strong sense, or did it come up that we realized we had a weak sense of our own self-worth? All of these things, and those things can affect our relationships, right? Listen, I've read before and of course experienced myself over the years, the big causes of problems with relationships can be dynamics and issues revolving around money and families and children, right? Um, Stressors in those areas can cause tension in relationships. And it's hard to know. I mean, we maybe we aren't able to express ourselves the way that we need to in individual situations, right? And sometimes we can't. It's like there's a need to sacrifice and hold back a little bit of our own wants and needs to give to others. But how far do we push the envelope, and how do we balance that out? And are the people that we are working with and the resources that we have to work with able to come together cohesively so that there isn't frustration weighed in any one place? And I mean, I think we'll all agree that that's really difficult to do. And this period of time with the Venus retrograde may have shown you where those situations or those feelings could have been going on for way too long, right? And so there were breaks and issues that may have come up to bring these things to our awareness so that we could either work on them, at the very least recognize them, or break away from them, right? And when I go through and just kind of talk about what Venus has done, there were opportunities for Venus to actually do those things. And some of those things may have come up very suddenly, and we may not have had much control over them. Okay. Chiron. We have Chiron, the wounded healer, in the sign of Aries, which is all about the self, ruled by Mars, a cardinal fire sign. And Chiron's been in Aries for quite some time, moving along, getting really close to the North Node, which is our collective destiny. And Aries is about our physical body. It's about our ability to take action and be brave and champion things and take on projects and, just actually go for what it is that we want, balancing that out with not being too selfish, right? But being able to work, give ourselves what we need, speak up, do what we have to do, start new things. Aries is all about new things. And balance that with relationships, right? And we have the nodal axis in Aries and Libra, and Chiron is there. And Chiron is the wounding that we have around that. And we're talking about Mars that could have been, processing a physical wound that we may have had, an emotional wound that we may have had, a wound that we had, based on a figure that was, harsh or cruel to us. It just kind of depends. Chiron has gone retrograde. So we're internally taking a look at what our own personal wounding is. You can find Chiron transiting in the Aries part of your chart. Chiron went retrograde on July 24th. Make a note of all these dates. July 24th at 19 degrees of Aries, and will stay in retrograde until December the 26th, when he will come out of retrograde at 13 degrees of Aries. We have Neptune, right? The planet of dreams and illusions and creativity, the mystical planet that represents the sign of Pisces, the planet that dissolves, right? The planet that just kind of creates wanderlust and confusion at times. It can also be about lies and deceit, and just a mask being and a veil being kind of covering everything. Some of us have an ability to actually sort of operate in that realm, and see behind the veil, right? Neptune goes or we're comfortable there, right? Neptune goes retrograde, or went retrograde on July the 2nd at 27 degrees of Pisces, and will be retrograde until December the 6th, when it comes out of its retrograde at 24 degrees of Pisces. So it's said that the Neptune retrograde might take the blinders off for us a little bit, give us an opportunity to sort of clear our heads and see things a little bit more clearly, and maybe even create what it is that we've been wondering and learning about, or and actually bring it into a tangible form. It could be something like that, because Neptune rules music. Pisces and Neptune rule things like the unseen, right? Chemicals and drugs and diseases, viruses, things that are airborne, large bodies of water, right? Neptune goes retrograde. It's said to sort of pull back and go, into a place, at least for us personally, where we're processing those kinds of things and experiencing those things and that clarity potentially internally, right? Then we have Mercury, of course, that went retrograde on August 25th at 21 degrees of Virgo, coming out of its retrograde, but still in its shadow. Remember, there's always that shadow period on September the 15th at 8 degrees of Virgo. Mercury retrograde, I talked about that in the video in the sign of Virgo, where it is where it is exalted and it operates very, very well. Virgo representing work and daily routines and service and the body. Going retrograde is giving us a chance to sort of clean up and rework things from the past. And because Mercury rules communication and messages in the mind, we could be remembering things that we've forgotten. We could be hearing from people that we haven't heard from for a while. Anything like that. So Mercury retrograde. Uranus retrograde, like I mentioned, Uranus went retrograde on September 1st, but it's stationed retrograde on a few days before, on the 28th. And that was the day that my air conditioner started to go sideways. But the official retrograde started on September the 1st at 23 degrees of Taurus, where it's been transiting for a while. Uranus transits take about 7.5 years, so it's been there for a while. And Uranus will transit or will retrograde until January 27th, very slow moving planet, where it will come out of its retrograde at 19 degrees of Taurus. And we know Taurus, material resources, our own sense of self-worth, the things that we value, food, finances, including how we earn our income. All of those things, Uranus transiting through that sign has caused upsets and changes. And in its retrograde process, going back and forth, it's like we're looking inward. And it, Uranus is also about intuition, right? Lightning fast intuition and ideas. And because Uranus represents progress, it's designed to move us forward, because Uranus wants change to move things forward. Now, sometimes, especially in a sign like Taurus, and that represents all material, practical things, we experience those changes, and they can come very suddenly and can be very disruptive with Uranus in the sign of Taurus. And so now that is retrograde, and especially since Venus has made aspects to Uranus over the summer, we have time to sort of internalize those things, right? How are we going to progress forward? Absorbing the changes, right? Paying attention to how we feel. Uranus very much represents the nervous system. And of course, like I said, intuition. So we have that retrograde going on. And in retrograde, it's said that retrograde times tend to slow things down for us internally. Like we can feel like things aren't as moving as quickly as they normally do. And that definitely can be the case. So you'll have to let me know how you experience retrograde. A lot of these things have to do with what area of your chart the planets are transiting, and the houses in your chart that that planet is ruling, is affecting, right? So Uranus retrograde. Those are all the retrogrades right now. There are so many retrogrades. I mean, like I said, Venus came out, Uranus went in. Oh, Jupiter. Huh. I nearly forgot about Jupiter. Jupiter went retrograde yesterday in the sign of Taurus. We have two outer planets retrograde in the sign of Taurus, went retrograde yesterday at 15 degrees of Taurus, and will stay retrograde until December 31st, where it will come out its retrograde at 5 degrees, which is very close to where it started. Jupiter went into Taurus in May of this last year. And so this retrograde is covering the time from June through December, covering that time period from 5 degrees to 15 degrees, which I think we've been experiencing all summer. So there is a theme here with this Venus retrograde, with all these things, where this summer was a very important summer of changes, and sort of repositioning things, probably through experiences. That is really important. That's important in terms of, at least, in one way I see, especially the Venus retrograde, it's sort of preparing us for the eclipses that are coming on the nodal axis with Aries and Libra. Why? Because Venus rules Libra. So, and because that's a relationship axis, it's like, I think we're in for, a year and a half of, having to deal with balancing some kinds of relationship issues. Doesn't always have to be romantic or marriage. It can be relationships with anybody, including bosses or clients, anything where we come in contact with other people, right? So I think this Venus retrograde was sort of like kind of hitting us a little bit potentially in the ego, because, Leo represents the ego, too, ruled by the sun. It's like, I think we needed a little bit of, ego check there. Did we need something or things to happen that sort of put us in a place where we could learn how to speak up and claim what it is that made us happy? Or did we need a little bit of a, an ego check in terms of making us realize that we had to tame things down? Maybe, right? Wherever it is, we're going into this nodal transit, having experienced things that may have wanted to create some kind of adjustment, right, in our lives before we go into that. Okay, so that covers the retrogrades. I am going to take a look here, just because I want to go over this Venus, and just give you a little bit of a picture in your mind, because there is something really interesting, and I'm not gonna, wind it forward and take it back and show you all the dates, because I've talked about these things in prior videos. But there are some interesting points here that are coming up that I wanted to point out, that you could kind of keep an eye out for. And so I just want to zero in here on the Leo part of the chart, and where Venus is, and the Taurus part of the chart. And of course, talked about many times the square that Venus has been creating, and that during a retrograde will create a square to a planet, any retrograde, 3 times. It's the square on the front end, the entry, the middle square, and then the end, which is where things are said to come to a conclusion, right? It's like that would be the last square. So we have Venus here in Leo, and I'm going to run through the dates. So Venus squared Jupiter in the sign of Taurus on June the 11th at 5 degrees. The second square occurred August 21st at 15 degrees. And the last square will occur on September 16th at 15 degrees, which will be the day after Mercury comes out of retrograde, which is over here. Hang on. Over here in the sign of Virgo. And And hang on. And it will be happening twice at 15 degrees. So 15 degrees is something to watch for. If you don't understand degree theory, you can always look up what the meaning of the Sabian symbol is for, if you're going to look those up, for 16 degrees of Taurus, because we always round up. But in a retrograde, you might want to read exactly the degrees. So 15 and 16 degrees of Taurus. But we know in the sign of Taurus, again, it's about material things, and Jupiter, about growth, right? About what we've learned, about our plan, the bigger picture, right? The higher mind, our faith and our beliefs. Venus has hit that square to Jupiter several times. Again, Taurus being material, the material world, finances and the things that we need, right? But also our own personal self-esteem, and Venus being our values, finances, and Leo being about the self and the ego. So we had that square 3 times. Watch out for the one coming up on the 15th. We have a full moon right at the same time, or not a full moon, a new moon right at the same time in the sign of Virgo, which I'll talk about another time. And then we have also, if you look at the same axis, we have Uranus over there in the sign of Taurus, and that has squared, Venus has squared Uranus in the sign of Taurus 3 times. The first time was July 1st, and that could have been, something suddenly occurring, right? It could have been a sudden break or a restless feeling that, you wanted to break free. Could have been a relationship, could have been an up and down or a change in finances or anything material, right? Anything with the land, anything, with banking and in your body and, how you were feeling, a situation that challenged, your self-esteem and how you felt. Again, Venus and Leo, your sense of being heard, your feeling of joy and happiness and creativity. Could have also been coming up with a really great idea, intuition, Uranus, right? But it's something that likely affected your material life in some way, your practical material life in some way. So the first square, July 1st, second, August 10th at 22 degrees. The last square will happen on September the 28th at 22 degrees. So we see that with the square to Jupiter, 15 degrees, the square to Uranus, 22 degrees. There's significance there. You might want to take a look at 22 and 23 degrees of Taurus and Leo as well. And what kinds of themes were occurring over the summer in your relationships, in your finances, with your kids. When I look at what's going on or the things that have been going on out there in the world, aside from those kinds of things, it's like one thing, Leo represents the heart, and of course it represents children. And because it's a fire sign, it represents hobbies and recreation activities and sports. I am astounded by how many kids, high school kids, even younger, and even, older, still young for our culture, young adults, have had cardiac issues during sporting events in the last 3 or 4 months. And I know that happens periodically and we hear about it, but it has been happening at an alarming rate. I read it. It's like a little kid, someplace in the Midwest with a Pop Warner, a friend of mine's nephew. We've seen them on the professional field. High school. We had 2 here in my state in the last few months where there were cardiac events or accidents that occurred on the sports fields. I wonder, it's like, why? And LeBron James' son, it's like, why are young people, all of a sudden at this kind of rate, heart problems? Why is that, right? It makes you wonder when you think about Taurus and the squares there, and then, what's going on in the world and what's happened in the last 3 years. It's like, does it have something to do with how we're taking care of our bodies, right? What we're putting in our bodies, what we're feeding ourselves, right? It makes you wonder. I'm sure that, you know, there are a lot of people out there that have analyzed this even further, but it kind of makes you wonder what is causing those things. You know, if I'm being honest, you know, for me personally, I feel like it might have something to do with what we're ingesting, what's coming from the ground. You know, are there toxins, you know, in the food? And I know these are things that, you know, many environmentalists have been exploring for a long time, but also medications. I have to wonder. But anyway, I noticed that was a very prominent occurrence over the summer, more so than I had seen before. And it does relate, there are Leo related themes there, which, like I said, heart and blood, right? And accidents and sports and young people. So very interesting there. But for you personally, yeah, you know, there you could have had stressors, situations come up around those kinds of themes that affected your relationships in some way, your finances in some way. Yeah. So very intense summer of a lot of changes, a lot of things to absorb. And now we are coming out of that, but it's not over yet because we have that final square. Well, the Venus Jupiter square is happening all week this week. So what's going on for you this week, right? And then Jupiter, of course, going retrograde. But the final square we have between Jupiter and Uranus on September the 28th. Now, what I wanted to point out is interesting is that we have Juno here. Juno is this little flower looking symbol here. Juno is an asteroid that represents marriage and commitment, right? And there's a whole story behind it that I won't get into here on this video, but the essence of it is that it represents commitment, like our commitment, personal commitment. In the sign of Leo, it's like, what are we committing to in terms of our own personal joy and expression and creativity, conjunct Venus. And Juno's been transiting through Leo with Venus. That's been retrograde. And it's getting very close to doing a pretty long dance in conjunction Venus, so having a Venus-Juno conjunction for a while. And this could be very significant in terms of what we choose to commit to that feeds our own sense of joy and happiness, that has to do with our values, you know, romantic issues. And there will be a square from the conjunction to Uranus right around the time that exactly at 22 degrees. So between September the 8th, I wrote this down too. September the 8th is when things start to, when Juno and Venus start to get very, very close to one another. And from there through the 28th, 29th, they stay very close. But there are 3 occasions, there are 3 days. Let me see if I can actually light this up for you and show you my blind self. Show you the dates that it happens, and pay attention to these dates because I feel like they could be auspicious in some way. And I'd like to know if any of you experience anything around the themes of creativity or love or your own personal expression or sense of joy, right? Or with your children. So we're looking at this September the 8th, 12 degrees, the conjunction between Juno and Venus. And it'll be in a loose square to Jupiter still, because that's just a few days from now. And then as we go forward, we can see that they continue to stay very close. And on the 11th, making an exact conjunction at 13 degrees. Now, and I'm not going to mess with the hours, but if I were to, because the moon moves a degree every few hours, but on this day, on September the 11th, Venus, Mars, and the moon will make a conjunction. And the moon is our emotions and our environment and, our feelings, conjunct Venus and Juno in the sign of Leo. Keep an eye on this day. I don't know if there will be engagements or if there'll be all of a sudden people declaring, this is what I want for myself, if there will be births of children, Leo, or pregnancies announced. I don't know, but, square Jupiter, it's possible, right? Jupiter can represent, big news, including, things like pregnancy and things like that. And then, of course, Uranus will come into play later. So the 8th, the 11th, and then you'll see that they'll continue to dance back and forth a degree or so apart for most of that time period during the second and third weeks of September. And then we'll hit another exact conjunction on September 22nd at 18 degrees, again, squaring Uranus and Jupiter, creating some kind of potential progress, surprise, change, epiphany, something there. Square Jupiter, square Uranus. So the 22nd, and then we'll maintain that conjunction the 24th exact at 19 degrees. And then we're also experiencing a trine to Chiron and Aries that's getting close to the North Node, which indicates that there's a harmonious aspect there that may open something up for us that will identify either or help us to heal some kind of personal wounding. This looks like a really interesting time that we may be able to take advantage of, or at least keep an eye on to see what happens. Okay, so going forward, 20 degrees again, exact on the 26th, and 21 through the 28th, and then it hits 22 degrees, the conjunction between Juno and Venus, 22 degrees on September 29th, and will be in an exact square. That's that final square to Uranus in Taurus at exactly 22 degrees. 22 degrees indicate it's a Capricorn degree. It indicates that there's some kind of material change, something valuable, something that changes or is associated with structure, definitely commitment, work. This is long. This is something that has been worked long and hard for, right? All Saturn things, and that's a Saturn degree. So you may see something come to, maybe there's a decision that is made. Like I said, it's like, oh, you've decided what it is that you want for yourself, and there's a break away from something else. Uranus, some kind of progress forward, either up, out and away, or together and moving forward on the same page, right? And I talked about, the challenges sometimes when it comes to finances and kids and relationships and feelings and taking care of yourself versus taking care of the other and everyone else, how sometimes that's hard to balance. So maybe, the end of the month, close to the 29th, something comes to a head, right? There's a final decision made. It's like the Leo in you decides, or the Leo in your life, or just wherever that's transiting in your chart, there's a decision made of what's being committed to at that point. So keep an eye on those dates, because I think that is very, very interesting, and maybe it'll bring a much welcome a very welcome resolution, conclusion, reconciliation, or you know, just an amicable break from something that, you know, if being done authentically and, you know, from the heart, right, Leo, actually results in happiness, personal happiness, and and the happiness of the people that are involved. That's the hope. So keep an eye on those dates. Okay. So that's what I wanted to go over with all of you today. I know it was probably a lot of information. But you know, retrograde planets are interesting. And again, I wanted to recap the Pisces full moon that I missed and talk a little bit about Venus as it is coming out, as she is coming out of her retrograde, and you know what her trajectory has been and who she's been interacting with and what kinds of things are being brought up. And you know, her really close conjunction with Juno, uh that's going to be happening for most of this month, and the square to Uranus, which could bring us a surprise, and hopefully it's a good one. No more fires, no more, you know, abrupt, you know, earthquake type things, no more accidents on the field. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, right? I mean, listen, we all go through relationship ups and downs and breaks, and sometimes those things need to happen, right? Sometimes our finances go sideways, things come up, we have to move things around. This also has to do, Leo, with investments. So if something's going on with your investments, a little bit of back and forth, some surprises, all of those kinds of things. Also, you know, that might be a day where, you know, um, suddenly something pays off that you've been working on growing or building, you know, Jupiter having all those squares too. So just depends on where it's at in your chart. I will say though, with Saturn Pisces and the Pisces full moon, if you are a Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, this last full moon may have been a doozy. I mean, Saturn going through Pisces, especially if it's hitting your sun, moon, or your rising, had to be, it's a little difficult. And that transit's going to be around for a while, but this full moon affected those signs pretty heavily. So if you have any of those sun, moon, or rising signs in your life, or you are one yourself, give yourself a hug or give them a hug, because yeah, things might be a little heavy these days, or at least changing, right? Mutable signs, it's change. Yes, they, you know, things come in and out, and you know, learning to go with the flow is probably the best way. And mutable signs are used to that, but still, nonetheless, when you have Saturn there, that's, you know, causing blocks and delays and, you know, heaviness. This might be a difficult time for those signs. So, you know, we got to have some compassion for those friends, as well as the fixed signs who just came out of a year and a half of the nodal transits. And, you know, so anybody with Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and, you know, Scorpio had a difficult time. And the transits from Venus, Leo, a fixed sign, Taurus, a fixed sign ruled by Venus. Those guys, you know, are in there in the mix. And if you have a sum of both, mutable and fixed signs, there's a lot of change going on, right? A lot of change, a lot of evolutionary growth. And nobody's immune to this. We've got you know, the cardinal signs coming into play here, Libra and Aries, that are getting mostly affected with the nodal transits, although none of us are out of the woods there. And of course, the summer, I went over all of the retrogrades and the Venus trajectory. And then we've had Pluto squaring the nodes most of the summer, talked about Pluto. So it's been a crazy summer. Look to see where these things are moving in your chart. Tell me what you've experienced. How was your summer? Many are saying it was a summer they would rather forget, or a summer to remember. It's not quite over yet. And now we have a chance with these retrograde planets to hopefully take some of it in, slow things down, and do what we can to rearrange, or at least relax into it and process it. So that's what I wanted to go over with y'all today. We have a new moon coming up in the sign of Virgo on the 15th. And hopefully I'll be back to do something with that. I am planning to do a live here at one point. I'll have to recruit all of you guys, or ask all of you guys to come in and join me when I do that. But I will announce that, so that you guys have a heads up. Anyway, thanks for being here. If you're new, please consider subscribing, like and share the video. If you've been here for a while, thank you so much for being patient. Thank you for supporting me. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in looking at your birth chart, my email and my website are down in the description box. I would love to meet you and read for you. But anyway, yeah, I think this video is long enough. But I sure do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Comment down below. I'd love to hear what's going on in your life. And yeah, I will see you next time very soon. Until then, may the stars forever be in your favor. Take good care. Bye.